All right. This is an AI with Alec fireside chat with Dan Marrazza. This is a little different, right? Because this is not going to be as deeply Nerdville, which I love. The AI stuff. It's going to be a little bit different here. Dan is looking for his next opportunity in sport. He's a prolific marketer. And I want to and he's very digitally savvy. And I want to give him an opportunity here to show me what it is that I think, show you what it is that I've been so impressed upon. I want to give one quick shout out to our mutual friend, Meghan Chayka, the co-founder of Stathletes, because you, Dan, put forth some awesome, very thoughtful content on your LinkedIn recently, a couple of different times about what you're looking for next. And that's how I found you. And I appreciate taking the time. So welcome to the fireside chat. And without further delay, because you know how fast these things are, we're going to get right into it. So I've got a first question for you. All right?
Thanks for having me.
You bet. Of course. So the streaming stuff, right? I shared with you, how much, I love it. And I watch the NHL, the Amazon stuff, right? With the face off with all the players from not my favorite team, the New York Rangers, the only hockey team, all due respect. But I think you have some really interesting thoughts around streaming and how these teams and leagues could be thinking about this, which also ties to some innovation stuff we'll get into. But without further delay, Dan, I kind of stole a little bit of thunder there. Why don't you let the audience understand your perspective on streaming within sport?
Sure. I think it's a great question. I think it's the question of the decade when it comes to working in sports. I think it's the first time in 40 years since cable TV came about that the way people consume their teams and sports in general has changed. And this change usually happens once a generation. And where in the old days, the primary financial driver for a lot of teams with their cable deals, especially in hockey and the NBA and some of the sports as well, is that now everything's moving to streaming, and you have different places that are trying to figure out how to handle this. Do they start their own streaming services, which we've seen some places do? Do they stay on cable altogether? Do they try to latch on to a more established streaming partner? I think as that gets solved, and as places solve that, there's going to be somebody who figures this out faster than others. The way the Atlanta Braves and the Chicago Cubs figured out cable TV before everyone else, and they became national followings, and they were seen everywhere on TBS and WGN, or before that was the radio, and the St. Louis Cardinals got on KMOX, and they had frequency from Florida to Colorado, and they got a national following. They figured out the radio thing first. Who figures out the streaming thing first, I think, is going to be the storyline of the decade when it comes to sports business.
I love that. Let's go a little deeper into it too, because we talked about trade-offs, right? So me, with the lens through which I see the world, the AI lens, the data lens, I get excited about the underlying fan data associated with all that content consumption and how that can improve fan experience, and there's commercialization stuff. But talk a little bit about the stuff we discussed and your thoughts on the trade-off between the short-term and the longer-term benefit of thinking through the framework of streaming.
No, I think that's nail on the head of the question that different companies are going to have, different teams are going to have about what they want to do. Do you want to have your own service? Do you want to join an existing service? Well, it depends on what your goals are and how you prioritize that. And for example, if you start your own streaming service, which you've seen a lot of teams do, is that the benefit of it is you get subscription fees, you get data, you can use customer insights and AI and all those things that you love, and you could use that to really improve a business overall. The negative of that is it's really hard to get people to subscribe to a service when they are not already a fan of a team. I know growing up in New Jersey is back then you needed a box to get the Devils, and the Rangers you didn't. We had a box, so we became Devils fans because it was successful.
I'm sorry about that. Yeah, it's too bad.
Is that if we didn't have the box, though, we would have become Ranger fans, and people will not knock down that barrier if they're not already fans to become a fan. So the thing is, okay, you get the short-term gain of you get your subscription fees from your existing fan base, but you may choke off the supply of new fans by not being accessible. On the other side, say you make a deal with a Netflix or an Amazon Prime or Disney Plus. I'm just spouting off some of the most popular streaming services out there. Is that okay? Depending on what the deal is, you might not get all the revenue. You might not get the email addresses the same way. The partner might. You might not get as much money up front, but kind of like the way the Braves had the Superstation was in every house with cable in America. If you're in Disney Plus, you're in almost every house in America, and all of a sudden now you have a chance to grow your following. That in the long term it's an opportunity for you to grow your fan base and grow your brand in a way that allows you to drive revenue long term. That's just an example of one of the questions that teams will have to face is, well, which one do you want? A lot of them will say both. But the thing is, sometimes you can't have both with things. You need to kind of pick one. And I think as we navigate that, I think what you're going to start seeing is certain teams are going to be early adopters in certain directions. And depending on the success they have or don't have, you're going to see a lot of places following along. But I think those questions are questions that maybe have not been asked before with teams that are going to have to be asked now as the whole streaming thing gets figured out.
I'm with you. And one thing that we spoke about, previously that I thought was also especially intriguing, the audience will want to understand your perspective on is this notion of crossover appeal of one athlete to another sport. Retainers, I know we talked about, and I'm not going to name the guy that I almost just did that I told you I wouldn't, who I'm a big fan of for that reason. Talk to us a little bit about the role you think that big time athletes and celebrities can have in cross marketing and just the influence that can have on a local and or regional or national, thought process around fan growth and audience development.
Check this out for a piece of data. During the Olympics, Snoop Dogg took the internet by storm during the Olympics.
My wife loved it. Absolutely loved it. Yes.
It's you had so many parents that maybe in their 60s now were loving it back when they used to ground their kids for buying Snoop Dogg CDs back in the day. Now Snoop Dogg is the way to go. But the thing is, Snoop Dogg was used for those who weren't watching, even though it seems like a lot of people were, for maybe some non-traditional sports like archery or pole vaulting or sports that maybe don't have followings of basketball or football or something like that. And he would do his unique brand of Snoop Dogg. There was one where he was almost like dancing and with a horse that was like kind of like whinnying back and forth. And the thing is, it became so entertaining that regardless of whether or not you were a fan of that sport, especially for a lot of the more niche sports, people were watching it. Snoop Dogg raised ratings by 78% was the number. I think they paid him $9 million for the 2 weeks to do so. So he was well compensated, but still to that point, the Snoop Dogg effect was real. And I think as we see that, I think a lot of times influencer marketing is thrown around. But the thing is, it's not just hey, here was a post on social. It's how do you really intimately involve them in the brands? And Snoop Dogg was heavily involved in the NBC brand for the Olympics. He was one of the forefronts of that. So the thing is, as we relate that back to us and different teams now, how do you grow your following? Is that it's kind of hard to make people care about something that they don't already care about. And we talk about the streaming aspect too, the same way. It's hard to get people to buy a streaming service for a team that they're not already a fan of the team. Snoop Dogg was a really good example of if you do it the right way, you can get people to care about something that they maybe did not originally care about. And even if they're not diehards of archery or pole vaulting, they're watching and you're opening the door for them to become bigger fans of the sport in general and the sport as a whole. I think as we see streaming services and we see things like the Manning Cast that have had similar effects where it's great content, but it just happens to be with a game going on in the background to bring in new fans and casual fans and things like that. I think the ability to involve that on streaming and alternate broadcasts and things like that have the ability to really allow certain teams, if they choose to go that route, the opportunity to grow their followings, and also at that same time to open up larger content opportunities where it's not just watching the game for 2.5, 3 hours. It's a lot of Snoop Dogg was sliced up into 20-second clips that were seen 5 days later, and it wasn't in real time, but people were still consuming the content. I think that aspect and that dive in could be a really interesting wrinkle to the streaming of how things work, because it allows you not to have just one channel. When you had a cable deal, you had one channel, that's what it was on. Well, if you have a streaming deal, you could have 2 different streams in there. You could do multiple streams, and you could do it different ways. So as this expands and allows you to have more options, it just creates many more opportunities to do things in a way that you maybe would not have 20 years ago that could really reach new fan bases.
I love that. And I think I'm going to ask you to go a little bit deeper, because we did talk about this notion of fan growth in part by not requiring, a fan to quote unquote watch the whole game. In certain sports, are a little bit longer than others, and there's, more games than others. And, there's all that conversation that goes on. But I wonder, in the world of Twitter and TikTok and those types of platforms versus, even LinkedIn, right? I see that's where we connected, right? When I see perspective, or you kind of bring me deeper into the business side or the technology side and the investing side, that's where you can kind of get me, even if it's a sport that I'm not necessarily all that excited about. So talk a little bit more, and I know we're approaching time, but talk a little bit more about that notion of maybe the way that smaller, more bite-sized, pieces of content and or not having to watch the whole game could drive, fan growth, fan awareness, branding opportunities, you name it.
So I'm convinced if you go the years 2018 to 2020, the most recognizable face in the National Hockey League was Gritty, because Gritty was everywhere. And it wasn't that people were all in Philadelphia going to hockey games. It was because his appearance and antics were being sliced up and put on Barstool Pizza reviews and anywhere. You couldn't escape Gritty. Gritty was everywhere. I think that really kind of shows how that entertainment aspect and the value of it is. That it sounds crazy to say that more people in the United States probably knew what Gritty looked like than Connor McDavid. But it was true. I mean, I'll take McDavid on my team over Gritty, but
let's hope so.
As long as we're competing in hockey, yeah.
You're talking about a Ranger fan first, like bring the Flyers. It's a terrible idea. That being said, McDavid's the man.
But to that point, though, is it really showed how that appeal can really work in terms of people that were never watching the team, and it still became the most popular face in the league. And that, to me, is really interesting. So the same thing with Snoop Dogg. A lot of people were not watching full-size events. They were on their phones. They were watching short clips, and they were driving revenue. They were driving advertising revenue. They were driving all of these things. I think a lot of times sports always looked at it as we got to have people watch the game for 3 hours. You always hear, especially baseball, it's the World Series this time of year. How do we appeal to a younger fan base? Well, maybe it's not looking only for people to sit down for 3 hours. Maybe it's saying, okay, we're going to gear this entirely towards people that only want to do part-time. But if we do enough of these fragmented, isn't really the right word, but partial fans, 30 partial fans is better than maybe one diehard fan when it comes to revenue.
That's it.
And not be restricted by regional and broadcast rights, because guess what? Twitter goes everywhere. TikTok goes everywhere. Gritty goes everywhere. But I think that is a really interesting element of it, of really redefining what fandom looks like. And fandom isn't necessarily just sitting down for watching every game. It's fandom is every day I go online and see what they posted on TikTok, or I see what that was, because they're so entertaining that regardless of whether I can name 3 players on their team or not, the stuff is so entertaining that I want it, and it becomes a lifestyle. That brand becomes a lifestyle. I think that aspect, as you go to streaming, but you also now do digital content, and the two could be married so much as you split off pieces of your streaming content onto online, kind of like the Manning cast does. See Manning cast clips going viral online when they say something memorable. I think it's really another important thing for a lot of teams to look at, that it's not only marketing to fans in their own region, whatever that may be, it's finding ways to cross over and appeal, knowing that you could drive revenue from outside your region significantly if you do it right. Because if you do it first, you'll be like the Braves on cable TV. Nobody else did that. The way the Cardinals weren't great, nobody did that, and you cornered the market. That there's really an opportunity for a team or a handful of teams in different sports to really corner the market by becoming the nation's team, or the team of the team, America's team, so to speak, by really kind of capturing this. The same way I know you're going to hate to hear it, Gritty became America's mascot there for a couple years.
I don't know, no comment. Anyhow, I appreciate it, Dan, really very much so. And thanks for taking the time. We'll share this thing out. And thanks for coming by the Fireside Chat with me.
Thanks so much for having me, Alec. I appreciate it.